Bro, I gotta be like the only person on the planet that actually has Vanguard merchandise. Like, did anyone else buy this shirt from the COD store? I gotta be like the only person on the planet that has this merchandise here. Like, yeah, that's right. I'm a freaking Chad. How can you tell? Okay, so now that we've kind of gone past that little detour I had to take with Splatoon before it shut down a couple weeks ago, I think it's time I get back into the main series I was doing on this channel. And to get back into things, I honestly do not envy the tasks that Treyarch had when they were making this next game. Not only were they on the receiving end of a genre of a shooter that was quickly fading from popularity, but now they were tasked to making the next game in the Call of Duty series right after Call of Duty 4. And while I had heard some things here and there about this game when I was younger, it still paled in comparison to how much Modern Warfare just dominated the conversation. Treyarch was pretty much fighting an uphill battle, even with more than double the development time they had for Call of Duty 3. So, you know, a regular development timeline. But Treyarch did not want to settle for just, being little brother to Infinity Ward. They spent that time cooking, and what we got here, this is one of the best World War II shooters ever made. I mean, I'm jumping the gun, but let's be real. Call of Duty World at War released November 11th, 2008. So World at War has gained a strong following in the years since it came out, and it's not hard to really see why. Being sandwiched in between 4 and then Modern Warfare 2, obviously a lot of people are kind of going to pass up on this game. And of course, this was right before Treyarch really managed to prove their muscle with Black Ops 1. I really struggle to call it underrated because, it's Call of fucking Duty, but it really left a significant mark on the people who did play it. So the question you might be wondering is, well, why? Like last time, let's start with the single player. And full disclosure, I played the campaign on Xbox 360, but I strongly encourage that if you decide to get this game, get it on PC. I'll get more into why later. Like the last entries from World War II, World at War has you partake in different campaigns across the war, but unlike the last games, there's a bit more focus this time. Something that kind of bogged down playing the last games was that not only were there always at least 3 different campaigns, but each game was kind of waterlogged with a ton of characters that made it difficult to keep up outside of the actual fights you partook in. Here, there are only 2 campaigns with 3 characters each. That's it. There's no overarching narrative like in Modern Warfare. We're kind of back to what we had before. But right off the bat, World at War trims a lot of the fat in order to tell these stories on each front in a much more effective manner. This time around, we only have an American campaign taking place during the Pacific Theater, with the Russian campaign beginning with Stalingrad, and ending with the storming of the Reichstag. The American campaign begins with Private Miller being tortured by the Japanese army on Makin Island. He's rescued by a group of Marines led by Sergeant Sullivan and Corporal Roebuck, before proceeding to fight during the Battle of Peleliu, and single-handedly wins it with artillery sentries beyond his time. Wait, what? The first victory is short-lived, however, as Sullivan is killed by a Japanese soldier and Roebuck is promoted to cover the rest of the operation. Alongside Private Polanski, the 3 of you continue to fight for control of the island before eventually taking it, and before long, you briefly take control of a soldier during Operation Tengo to stop the Japanese from restocking Okinawa. Upon fighting on the island itself, the Americans move to take Shuri Castle, and while taking some Japanese soldiers hostage, you're confronted with saving either Roebuck or Polanski before finally winning and defeating the last of the Japanese. The Russian campaign begins with Private Dmitry Petrenko, who wakes up in a fountain full of bodies in Stalingrad. He joins Sergeant Viktor Reznov, who also survived the massacre, and works with him to hunt down and kill a Nazi general responsible for the many crimes in Stalingrad. Petrenko and Reznov succeed in doing so and escaping, and we cut to 1945 during the battle for Silo. Petrenko is reunited with Reznov and beats Private Chernov. They board a train to Berlin, proceed to storm the city, and eventually make their way to the Reichstag. Chernov is killed during the fight, but Petrenko and Reznov manage to make their way forward, defeating the last of the Nazis, and ending the war in Europe. And if at first it seems simple, well, it kind of is, and no, not like this, no, we're not there yet, we're not there yet. So yeah, obviously not as narratively driven as Call of Duty 4 was when that came out, but honestly, I think to just leave it at that would be a massive disservice to what this campaign was truly trying to accomplish. Let me just say this up front. If you look at World at War purely from a gameplay perspective, it's definitely much better than the original trilogy, but it doesn't even come close to Modern Warfare. And I get that's kind of an unfair comparison given the time period, but even then, World at War from a gameplay perspective doesn't really do much to change what was already established. The gameplay loop and level design kind of feels like a mishmash of the first 2 Call of Duty games. Levels are mostly linear, but just open enough at some points to give you a little bit of wiggle room, just like Call of Duty 2. but you definitely cannot get away with aggression. It's a lot more in line with the first game where you really have to take your time, which for a player like me means at least 50% of the deaths on regular difficulty were my fault because I wanted to go in guns blazing, but World at War is not afraid of making you regret that. You will be punished if you play it recklessly. The other 50% of deaths come from these motherfucking grenades. Jesus Christ! World at War is not a crazy hard game or anything, but these fucking things will make it seem like that. And I'm not talking about how infamously difficult Veteran is on this game. Grenades and explosives are everywhere in this goddamn campaign. And it's so annoying because not only is it a constant pace breaker for the game's tone, but it can start to make me feel the same repetition I got with the early games. Sometimes you don't get enough time to react to these fucking things, and other times I don't even know what the fuck killed me. Holy shit. Anyways, it can take some time adjusting given the kind of campaign we just got in Call of Duty 4 and what we would get afterwards, but I think it's in service, again, to what the real meat of World at War's campaign is. As good as a lot of World War II shooters were before this, you could definitely tell some of them were holding back when it came to the, what do I call it, realities of World War II and what people went through during it. World at War does not hold back in this regard. It is arguably the most brutal and violent game in the series. It's as clear as when you start both campaigns respectively as a POW and crawling among piles of bodies. Having the original games in my background now, one of my favorite moments is towards the end of the second mission where this grand triumphant music kicks in, you got the job done, and almost immediately after is when Sullivan is abruptly stabbed and Roebuck takes over command. It's kind of like the game is actively taunting you, oh, you thought you'd get something inspirational and admirable? Too bad, here's the reality of war. It's honestly a brilliant subversion of the genre that was kind of squeaky clean up to this point, and the game keeps this tone across the entire campaign. You know as early as the title screen and when you hear that menu music that you're in for something way different than what Call of Duty had done up to this point. World at War's levels themselves are nothing special. In fact, I think there can even be made an argument of this game being even more brainless than Call of Duty 2 at times, with the kind of basic and simple objectives you get, but it's what you experience along the way that makes World at War's campaign constantly engaging to play. The American campaign pits you against Japan, who were notoriously brutal in the war, and the game does not hold that back. You will be constantly and consistently ambushed. They will set traps. Soldiers will bonsai charge at you and try to stab you with bayonets. Details in general are a lot more grotesque. Soldiers will have their limbs blown off, their necks will get sliced. And with the gritty art style this game has, a lot of areas are going to be painted in blood. In some respects, it's almost like a horror game. Things are always tense in the American campaign, and it never feels like you can just step back and properly breathe. The Russian campaign is admittedly a little tired given its focus on Stalingrad and the end of the war, yet again, as well as the campaign mostly playing it straight outside of some cool moments here and there, but again, the execution of it is what makes it engaging. You will constantly bear witness to the absolute brutality of the Russian army's revenge against the Nazis, and at times, it can get a little uncomfortable. Russian soldiers will constantly find new ways of murdering Nazis on the spot. You'll have objectives where you have to murder any wounded soldiers left. One of the game's highlights is this moment where a handful of Nazi soldiers attempt to surrender, and the game gives you the choice of either shooting them dead immediately, burning them alive with Molotovs, or standing by while the rest of the soldiers do the dirty work. It kind of begs the question of what would even be the quote-unquote correct choice in a situation like this, and more so if it says something about a player depending on how they choose to interact with a scene like this. This happens across all of the Russian campaign. Reznov is hell-bent on revenge against the Germans for what they did to him and his comrades in Stalingrad by any means necessary, and it's led by a stellar performance from Gary Oldman. He's definitely a lot more notable as Reznov in a later game we'll talk about, but he kills it in the role here. And on that note, let's not sleep on Kiefer Sutherland. It's kind of a shame that Roebuck's ultimate fate is left to the player, and it's probably the reason why he hasn't shown up since this game, but Sutherland honestly does a really good job here as this character. But back to the Russian campaign real quick. Chernov, by contrast, is much more of a pacifist, believing that what the Russians are doing here isn't necessarily right. And all the while, both of them are likely completely unaware of just how bad the atrocities the Nazis have committed are in their own country. And the thing is, they're right and wrong. This campaign, like Call of Duty 4, presents a lot of moral questions about the nature of war, how far is too far, and if we have any business doing the things we do to accomplish winning a war. But in my opinion, unlike Call of Duty 4, what World at War does is incredibly effective for one reason, and one major reason at that. All of this actually happened. This game's presentation is this neat mix of the mission briefings Call of Duty 4 had with some of the analog tech and art style that would have made sense for the time period. But throughout all of this, the briefings are spliced together with real footage of the war. The game ends by telling the player World War II was the deadliest conflict in human history, and it ends there. Because of that, I think these questions are a lot more appropriate in context because it's in reference to a conflict that actually happened. Call of Duty 4's conflict was very obviously inspired by modern conflict, but it just seemed way too afraid to make any actual statements about it, or beg any morally ambiguous questions about the nature of war in the modern age. World at War doesn't do that. It is constantly reminding you that all this bloodshed, all of these atrocities, all of these horrible things actually happened. But despite all of that, the game still has its brief moments of victory here and there, and it makes the final moment when Russia wins the war feel earned. And in a really twisted way, I think this makes the nature of the game a lot more inspiring than the last games. Because while all of these soldiers went through all of this hell during the war, it reminds you what was at stake. And that despite going through hell itself, these soldiers still went through with it because, as unfortunate as this war was, it had to be done in order to secure a better future, at least for the time being. Seeing all of these atrocities, watching all of these war crimes, experiencing this brutality through the eyes of two soldiers can be incredibly uncomfortable, especially if you find yourself doing the very thing in the game you wouldn't expect or anticipate. But knowing these soldiers endured all of this, but still fought anyways because choosing not to would have made the world a worse place, kind of makes me a little more grateful for the life I've got, I'll be real. I'm sure there might be some disagreement there, and I'll admit there's definitely a shit ton of nuance I'm skipping out on that, quite honestly. That could take up its own separate video. But while I love this game's campaign and what it presents and what it does, there's a part of me that wants to continue a conversation like this, but there's also a larger part of me that has to bring things down a little bit back down to earth and remind everyone, this is the same game Nazi Zombies originally came from. Like, I really could go on all day about this kind of topic, but within the scope of a video like this, let's be totally real. We're still talking about a Call of Duty game. As nuanced as the campaign is, all of that kind of goes completely out the window when you factor in multiplayer and this new game mode. Okay, now let's get into the multiplayer, and I'm gonna keep it real with you guys. I tried really hard to be patient with finding matches on this game's multiplayer, and while this game isn't necessarily dead compared to the pre-COD 4 games, there's not a ton of people playing this game anymore. I really tried as much as I could on console and I got nowhere. So I'll emphasize again, if you want to play multiplayer in any capacity, get the game on PC. Most of the lobbies are modded, but it's the best bet you've got as far as playing multiplayer. Also the best bet as far as actually leveling up quicker. Yeah, let's just do that real quick. Yeah, that seems about right. Now I can actually properly talk about this. Beyond that, though, there's honestly not a whole lot I can really talk about. Not when it comes to the core gameplay loop or anything, that's still just as fun and addicting. But as you play World at War's multiplayer, going through that same arcade loop that Call of Duty 4 had, you might notice some other similarities to Call of Duty 4. A lot of them, in fact. Creative class returns, the perk structure returns, and with it perks like Juggernaut, Stopping Power, and Last Stand Again. Oh my god. Kill streaks return, except the final one this time, instead of a helicopter, is calling in attack dogs to patrol the map. Challenge structures and weapon unlocks are the exact same. Prestige mode is the same pointless grind, and although this time you do get extra class slots, you only get 5 more total after spending all of that time grinding 10 times over. Local multiplayer on consoles is once again worthless since your options are so limited. If you're hearing all of this and thinking, wow, this just sounds like Call of Duty 4 with a World War II coat of paint, well, I've got news for you. It is. Now, on one hand, I don't think this is inherently a bad thing. Call of Duty 4's gameplay and multiplayer was a ton of fun and really engaging, and it's the same deal here. Maps are still mostly solid. Mocking and Castle are two of my favorites here. The same game modes return. The game also does add some new things here and there. This is the first game in the series to have Flak Jacket and Tac Mask perks, which protect you from lethal and special grenades respectively. Gas grenades and flares are the new special grenades you can use, as are Molotov cocktails. One of the perks gives you a pocket flamethrower. A couple maps have drivable tanks, and now there's a perk slot that can give you a benefit for them as well. But all of this is largely small and arbitrary. I hear all the time that this game's multiplayer is really underrated, and I can see why. All those mechanics that made COD 4 so great are mostly copy-pasted here too with a World War II theme, and if you prefer that to the modern setting, this game was probably right up your alley back when it released. But with that copy-pasting comes the exact same issues Call of Duty 4 had. Juggernaut and Stopping Power are still overpowered perks. Last Stand still exists. This game had its own infamously busted weapon with the MP40, just like COD 4 and the M16. Bouncing Bettys are absolutely ridiculous to deal with. Many elements that made Call of Duty 4 fun are here, but it also retains the same unbalances. And if you were hoping this would improve in the last game, well, sorry to say, there's not much different. I do know it sounds like I'm selling this game short, but after how refreshing Call of Duty 4 made things, especially in context of having played the first 3 games now, multiplayer on World at War, not really pushing the needle in any significant ways, makes it really feel like the lesser game in comparison. Whether or not you prefer this game largely boils down to if you like the setting more. And again, to give credit where it's due, I do think they make some small improvements here and there. Again, Flak Jacket and Tac Mask are great mainstays for perks. And generally speaking, I think the map design is better than Call of Duty 4. But coming straight off of that game, I don't really find that much of a compelling reason to come back to the multiplayer of this game. Some of that is from my own personal biases, sure, and I can fully understand Treyarch wanting to bring over the same things that made COD 4 so revolutionary, but in today's context, it's just one of the most blatant cases of the series just doing the same thing it quite literally just did. Just like Call of Duty 4, I think you'll mostly get your worth here from the PC community and with all the mods and whatnot people have made. Just like Call of Duty 4, World at War has a great PC community that's still active to this day. Although, admittedly, a decent chunk of that also comes from zombies. This was the first game in the series to have a co-op mode. It is there in the campaign as well, and honestly, it's pretty cool. I wish Call of Duty would do this more often. But Zombies is absolutely where it truly shines. This is essentially a horde mode. You'll start off on a map with up to 3 other players, and your objective is basically to survive as long as possible. Shooting zombies and rebuilding barriers will earn you points, which you can use to buy weapons from the walls on these chalk outlines, open doors to new sections of maps, or buy something from the mystery box. This theme will give you a weapon completely at random, and it can be anything in the sandbox. Assault rifles, submachine guns, pistols, etc. But there's also a very slight chance of getting the new Wonder Weapons. These are special weapons that you can only get from the box. In this game's case, this includes the Ray Gun, a pistol weapon that shoots lasers with splash damage, the Monkey Bomb, which draws zombies to it for a limited time before exploding, and in later maps, the Wonder Waff, a 3-shot rifle that shoots lightning and can stun chains of zombies. It's an incredibly simple premise and design, but it becomes extremely addicting. Like the rest of the game, it once again has that arcade style of gameplay that rewards you for staying alive, and as such, you'll want to stay alive as long as possible. Sometimes you'll also be rewarded with pickups for killing zombies, which can include insta-kill on zombies, double points, and the nuke, which blows up all the zombies currently out and about. There's not a ton of depth here, but the simplicity of it combined with the arcade nature is what makes it so addicting, and in my opinion, makes it one of the best modes in the series, although I'm sure most people wouldn't argue with that opinion. And it's a mode that would only improve over time too. Later maps would add the aforementioned Wonder Waff gun, you can buy perks to help you survive for longer, and there's also this thing called Pack-a-Punch, which makes your guns exponentially stronger, so you can survive even longer. I think this is a good way to talk about the DLC of the game real quick. Call of Duty 4 also had this, but it was limited to 1 map pack. This game is where the series truly starts finding its footing with post-launch content. From this point onward, the post-launch of Call of Duty becomes a really integral part of the series, for better and for worse. Starting with World at War, games would consistently get DLC after launch to keep people playing until the next game. In World at War's case, this means a handful of new multiplayer maps, and in Zombies, 3 new maps. Now, I like the maps here from Zombies fine enough. Nocturne on Toten is a classic map. Shino Numa can be a bunch of fun. Verrucht is... And Derice is still one of the best zombie maps in the series. But if I'm playing these maps specifically, I'm likely playing them on Black Ops. It's hard for me to comment on this game's DLC since I never really played the multiplayer here, but I still think it's worth mentioning as later on, this kind of stuff becomes a key part of Call of Duty's life cycle, quality notwithstanding and varying. If I'm playing zombies here in any capacity, it's very likely to play custom zombie maps. This here makes the PC version of the game the best and probably only real way to play this game nowadays. People have made so many custom maps for this game, and just like Call of Duty 4, it's an entirely new topic just covering what the zombies community has made for this game. There is so much I could talk about that I can't really talk about in this video. Now, I'm sure a lot of that sounds really anticlimactic, but I can't emphasize enough, don't take any of this to mean that World at War isn't worth playing. Like Call of Duty 4, I do think it's worth it for the single player alone. The sheer amount of dread and realism it throws at you can be very heavy-handed at times, but it's in benefit of showing the horror and glory of World War II without any compromises. Besides introducing zombies, it's what makes this game in the series stand out from others the most. In the end, on the multiplayer side of things for Call of Duty, World at War is just redundant. I struggled to write a script for this video outside the campaign because not only can you not really play the traditional multiplayer experience of this game anymore unless you find very specific servers on PC, I don't really think you're missing too much since it retreads what the last game already did. I think World at War's multiplayer and zombies is absolutely worth it for custom lobbies and mod support, It has some of the best of that in the series, but don't go into it in today's world expecting too much. The amount of people regularly playing this game pales in comparison to Call of Duty 4. World at War is still a really, really solid game with the best campaign a World War II shooter has ever seen. Just know you'll have to make some effort if you want to enjoy anything else it has going for. You know, I said so little in this entire video, but like, it kind of still feels like my most difficult review yet. Honestly, there's not really much else I can say that hasn't really already been said about this game. I quite literally talked about everything World at War has to offer in Call of Duty 4's video. Again, I keep saying it, but really I have to emphasize, outside of the campaign, don't go straight into this expecting to be able to have an authentic experience immediately like you can with Call of Duty 4. Unless you've got a handful of friends to play with online, your enjoyment nowadays is purely going to hinge on how much you enjoy the PC community is doing. But that's all I gotta say. I'm not gonna end this one on a joke just like the last couple of videos, because considering the subject matter of World at War, it doesn't really feel as appropriate. I mean, well, unless you want to count the custom zombies shit I just showed you guys. But that having been said, thanks for watching the video, and I'll see you guys in the next one.